thank you for joining us. The session is going to be on the Bedouins of the Naqab, resisting erasure in 48 Palestine. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm a psychotherapist from Nazareth. I work in my own practice. I do cognitive behavioral psychotherapy, and I am also the coordinator of a project on liberation psychology at Mada Al Carmel, the Arab Center for Applied Research in Haifa. So, and I will be chairing the session this evening. Maybe I think I should say this afternoon because you know, Palestine time, we are evening now. So this is why I keep saying this evening. So this evening we will be discussing the reality of life for one community of the Palestinians in Israel, the Bedouins of the Naqab, where the struggle against ethnic displacement continues on a daily basis since 1948. Before the Palestinian Nakba, more than 70,000 Arab Bedouins lived in the Naqab, mainly in its northern part, making a living through agriculture and cattle growing. After the Nakba, the State of Israel relocated the remaining Arab Bedouins, around 15,000 in number, in condensed areas, and others were expelled from their lands, which were then declared by the Israeli authorities as a restricted military zone. Denying the indigenous inhabitants to return to their lands and their ownership on their land not recognized, these villages became known as the unrecognized villages. This was part of the Israeli policies of keeping as many Arabs as possible on as little land as possible, and to make more land, to confiscate more land, to make it more available for Jews. Today, more than half of the Naqab Bedouins live in these unrecognized villages, while the other half lives in 7 villages that were established after the end of the military rule, all of which lack appropriate infrastructure and suffer high rates of poverty, unemployment, and crime. In 2011, the Israeli government adopted the Prover Plan, which aimed to settle the issue of the Bedouins, and it really meant expelling them from their land and pushing them into government-planned urban centers while totally disregarding their lifestyle and their needs. They have been so often called by researchers the invisible citizens, because although they are Israeli citizens, they have been denied basic services. The inhabitants have been repeatedly issued with demolition orders and their villages regularly destroyed. As part of ongoing policies of Judaization, cultural erasure, and forced displacement masked by processes of so-called modernization and development. As a matter of fact, these very days, the village of Ras Jaraba is being bulldozed for the sake of the expansion of the Jewish city of Dimona. This, in addition to al-Hiran, Al-Araqib, and many others who have been bulldozed many times, only to be rebuilt by the indigenous Bedouin community. Actually, the State of Israel deals with the Palestinian Bedouin communities as invaders and not as citizens. and they have been subject to systematic dispossession, economic de-development, and denial of basic services, such as infrastructure, education, health, mental health, and even the very elementary right to a safe and decent shelter that is constantly being threatened. The Bedouin community's suffering has expectedly intensified during the Corona pandemic. When schools were closed all over the country, these children of the Naqab had nowhere to go. They had no online education either. And leaving these children on the street and in their not existing homes, no adequate health care or medical services, and very limited access, if at all, to mental health services. As clinicians working in mental health, we can imagine how such a harsh reality that has been going on for decades can have some very serious psychological impact on the Bedouin individual and collective, children and adults alike, such as living in constant fear and vigilance, losing the very basic feeling of safety and security, feelings of helplessness and inability to protect one's home, family, and children, leading to feelings of frustration and anger and growing rates of violence, both general and domestic. Yet the Bedouin community remains determined to stay in their land, and their resilience becomes their means for resistance. Despite the difficulty, they keep saying that we're staying in our lands, and they keep rebuilding their villages and their homes, some of which have been demolished dozens of times. We will be hearing more about the reality of the Bedouin life in the Naqab from our three speakers, three inspiring women. I will introduce each one before her presentation, and we will take 3 presentations, and after the presentation, we will give a floor for questions. You can either ask your questions or you can write them on the chat. I will be seeing those too. And we will begin with the first speaker, Huda Abu Ubaid. Huda will be shedding light on the historical and legal aspects of the Israeli policies of uprooting and displacement in the Naqab. Huda is the coordinator of the lobby at the Naqab Coexistence Forum. She holds a BA in Middle Eastern and Feminist Studies, a BA in law, an activist interested in the human rights issue in the Naqab. And she is one of the initiators of the Prover Will Not Pass campaign against the Prover plan for the mass displacement of Palestinian Bedouin communities from the Naqab. So I will pass the floor to Huda. And Huda, you have 15 minutes to share your experience with us.
I
would like to ask everybody to
finish at 3.
There is noise, so if you can just mute yourself.
I think it's an issue at 3.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I will give a kind of overview about the historical story of the Bedouin community in the Naqab, and then give a little bit background about what's the meaning of the phrase unrecognized villages. So when we start talking about the historical life of the Bedouin community in the Naqab. We talk when someone hear the word of Bedouin people or Bedouin communities, you think about people who are living in a tent, and when they just feel bored, they put their tent on their camel and they move to the other place. So the situation in the Naqab wasn't like this before the year of 1948. And the Bedouin community was kind of in a process of staying in their places, which means they were semi-nomadic community, which is moves twice a year, not whenever they just think they feel bored and they want to move. So we talk about community that moves in a very close area and known area, which means big tribes moves from place in the they stay in one place in the summer, and then they move to other place in the winter, and then in the next summer they go back to the same place they were in the last summer before. So this was the situation before 48, and people were in kind of a process of staying actually in their places, and they just start building homes. The beginning of the 30s, 40s was the years of actually build homes and not tents. So this was the situation before 48, and then in 48 was the Nakba year. Most of the Bedouin community forced to leave to the Gaza Strip or to Jordan. In Jordan today, there is more than 1 million people who call themselves Sabawiya, which means people who came from Bir Saba area. So when we are talking about the refugees issue, the Palestinian refugees issue, so we are the community of the Bedouin is big part of this issue. Between 48 and 52, the state of Israel kind of forced the Bedouin community to enter area called the Siyaj area. Siyaj means area that under military rule and closed area. So people cannot go out this area without any permission from the Israeli army. And this was until 66. Inside this area were two groups. The first group is the refugees who came from outside this area, inside the refugees, and other group who were before this, before the war, before the 48. So when we are talking about the unrecognized villages, we are talking about the people who stayed in the Siyaj area from before 48. And today they are not agreed to move to new townships or new villages. In the 70s, the state of Israel planned 7 townships, includes Rahat. Today is one of the biggest townships in the Palestinian community inside 48. I live in Lakia. Lakia is a recognized township, and there is other 5 townships. this was in the 70s. In the middle of the 90s and after the Oslo agreement, actually the Palestinians inside the 48 felt that, okay, we should act as Israeli citizens. So they start to build organizations and build themselves, organize themselves as communities. And one of those organizations was the how I call that, المجلس الإقليمي, يا Allah, the Regional Council for the Unrecognized Villages. This regional council just count the places that Bedouin were living in. And they said in the end, we have 45 villages that the state don't recognize. And don't recognize means that they are not, when you open the official map of Israel, you cannot find those villages. But when you go down to Eilat on your way, you can see that there is people who are living in these places, and no signs. You cannot know who is this people, or how much people are living here, which village is this and which village is that. This is the main meaning of unrecognized. But the actual meaning is that when the state plan anything in the Naqab, they don't see those places. They don't see the people. They see only like empty desert. The Naqab is, for the Israelis, is empty. No people are living here. And then they plan and they approve the plans, and then they bring the plans to, they start to work, and then they find that there is a homes and there is people and there is a community. So this is also one of the issues. Today in the Naqab, we're talking about 300,000 Bedouin people living in the Naqab. Part of them in the recognized villages, half of them in the recognized villages, townships, and half of them are in the unrecognized villages. And the daily life of unrecognized village is that there is no electricity, no water in very high number of the villages, no high school. There is elementary schools, but no high schools in the unrecognized villages. So people, the students moves from the recognized to the close township to their recognized village through buses. Every year, the state of Israel put 120 million shekels on just on transportation from unrecognized villages to recognized villages for the students to move from their village to the close village or township. They can solve this problem, and they can put this money and just build high schools for the children, but they don't want, because if they put schools, this means that it will be recognized. It will be officially recognized. So they don't want to establish high schools. So this is another thing that people are suffer from. And the big issue of the unrecognized villages is the home demolitions. In 2021, we had more than 3,000 cases of home demolitions. And when most of these home demolitions are doing by the people themselves, the state just come and put paper that this building is illegal, and if you don't demolish this building, the state and the police will come and demolish it, and then you will pay the cost of the demolition, the cost of the tractors that come and do the job, and the cost of the police people who are coming to do their job. So so people actually 85% of the home demolitions or the buildings is doing by the owners by themselves. And the small percent that the state come and demolish houses, this is another story of how the state deal with its citizens, because they deal with people like their enemies of the state. They come as they want to do a war. It's the same. So when hundreds of policemen come to one village to destroy one house or two houses or any other buildings, and people are watching this situation, the first feeling is that, okay, this is the state. They don't let us live as humans. They don't let us live in a safe place, and they don't care which day is the day. They can come in the winter. They can come when it's raining. They can come when it's very warm day. They don't tell you when they will come. And maybe this is one of the reasons that people prefer to destroy their home by themselves, because when they come and destroy home, you don't have the time to take your things, to take your clothes, to take your everything in your home. You cannot take it out. So they just destroy the home, and then you by yourself, you deal with your thing. You want to take your clothes, you want to take your electricity machines. You cannot plan your life how it's gonna be after the demolition of the house. So and again, people feel like this is our this is the enemy. They don't care about us, even though we are Israeli citizens, and this is all of this is the reasons that people prefer to destroy the homes by themselves, because they don't want to see large groups of policemen who came and by violence and use in Sawe last January. It was very, very hard situation. They came, they just arrest a few, not few, around tens of children, teenagers, put them aside using violence, because the children was like getting crazy of the number of the police who came to destroy homes and to do other things. This is the main situation, and this is the big problem that people in the unrecognized villages are facing. Other issues is that mainly women are suffering from is when they don't have electricity, or when they don't have health services. Mainly women, there is no clinics in the unrecognized villages, so women. And other thing is that there is no public transportation. So when you want to go to when a woman want to go to clinic, she should walk for around between 40 minutes until maybe sometimes it's one hour to go to the main road, and then take bus from there to Beersheba, and then from Beersheba to the next village, the next recognized village or township, because they don't give services. There is no clinics in Beersheba that gives services to the people who come from the unrecognized villages. You should go to the township that close to your village. And because you don't have public transportation, you walk for 1 hour, then you take bus, and then you take another bus. So it takes you whole day when you want to go from unrecognized village to recognized village, just for meeting with the doctor for about 10 minutes. It takes you whole day. This is also one of the problems that mainly actually women faced. Other issues that no one is talking about is the other services that the state don't really give is sewage services that and which brings more disease, and it's very hard to live close to this. What else? There is many problems that people are faced, but I want to say that the main problem is the home demolitions that that people are facing actually every day in the unrecognized villages. And thank you for listening to me. If anyone has questions, I can answer in the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Huda, for sharing this really unbearable reality of the Bedouins and the Naqab. Hearing this, what you said about when you look at the map, you don't see us, we don't exist. You have to go down to see that we are there on the ground. While you see all the Jewish cities very well on the map, and this rationalization, racialization of space actually means not recognition of the identity and the very existence. And as Huda said, the budget being put on buses to transfer children to schools in different towns, they could be used to build schools there. But this is not the problem. The problem is not budget. The problem is the Jewish state that does not want to give the recognition of the ownership of the land to these people. And hearing about this very difficult reality of having to demolish your own house just to try to escape the high fines or the consequences of having the state demolish it is really beyond description. And this, thank you, Huda, for sharing these things with us. And this actually will take us to our second speaker, who actually talks about the attack on the home and especially the children. Professor Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian is going to be talking to us about how these attacks on the home and the human being, and especially the children, through what she calls the process of unchilding under occupation and colonialism. So we will go now to Professor Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian, who's a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She's a Palestinian feminist activist and the chair of the global law at Queen Mary University of London. Nadira, are you with us?
Yes. Yes. مساء الخير.
I give the floor to you. تفضلي Nadira. If you could share with us your experiences in 20 minutes or so. Thank you very much.
شكرا كثير هدى. ومساء الخير للجميع. Good evening, everybody. Well, my work in Naqab really revolves onto issues, the gender issues, housing demolitions, and children. And I think that it's where I would like to start where Huda stopped, where she was saying that they come to do a war. That's exactly how she had framed the situation of eraser, to Judaize the land, to culturally erase, the expelling of Bedouin, defining them invaders, the unrecognized, turning them as invisible, going back to the concept of a land with no people for people with no land. And Huda was telling us, no, people are here. It's that we are considered no people, so they are unrecognized. And I think this is a very important point, because the precarity of the unrecognized and the creation and recreation of precarity, whether by economic suffocation, whether by deprivation of education, whether by housing demolitions, and the attack on land is major. And especially what we see in the Naqab, and I think that we can consult with the work of Amara, Ahmed Amara, or Mansour al-Nasasri, or Sarab Abu Rube'a, Ismail Abu Saad, amazing scholars that are studying really day and night the situation in the Naqab, is how, the naming is very important. So in the name of developing in Naqab, they are really dispossessing and erasing. So let me start, as I usually start, by a voice of Ruqayya from Naqab, from Al-Araqib, a township that was demolished over 200 times. She said, my sister was horrified by the bulldozers and the large military and police forces that came to uproot us again and demolish our homes. When she heard their noise and that of the bulldozers, she peed on herself. And that embarrassed us all. They keep trying to uproot us. They hit us, pull our veil, push us to the ground. They have no dignity, no honor to push children, steal our homes, steal our fields, animals. Even the chickens were killed by their bulldozers. They're uprooting the way they scared my sister. It's not working, yeah? This is our land. So they are trying for them. So Al-Araqib, Ruqayya's village, has been demolished really more than 200 times in the past couple of years, during state authorized demolitions and land grabbing, such as this one in the Naqab area of the southern Israel. Police and soldiers direct bulldozers as they destroy the unrecognized homes and communities, although they are not as Huda explained clearly. Her reflections on one of these many demolitions illustrates from the perspective of a child the fear that has come to frame the erasure and dispossession of the Naqab Bedouin. She articulates for us how the state repetitive village demolition are intended to strip her people of their dignity while permanently uprooting her community so as to, as she said, to steal our land and our home and disgrace us. State violence against children like Ruqayya demonstrates that terror can speak viscerally. And it spoke viscerally because her sister peed on herself, yeah? Terror also speaks psychosocially. And we are in Cafe Palestine looking at the psychosocial effect when she discusses the humiliation of watching her community's homes being demolished and her community publicly dispossessed of their land. It speaks legally, as Huda was explaining to us, revealing how dispossession is conducted by law. And after all, as you know, colonialism was done legally. But terror also, and state terror, compels us to analyze her ordeal historically and politically, yeah? So Ruqayya's agonies carries power, her capacity to speak back to the state's surveillance over her movement, over her belonging, over her bed, her right to a home, and her community's survivability and bodily safety offers an opportunity really for us here in the cafe to explore the way the state's law, the state's policies, bureaucracies of that occupation and ideologies operate. And it operates as a regime of managing Ruqayya's childhood, yeah? And how understanding her childhood means delving into the collective attack against her family. So the dismemberment of the family, or the dismemberment that have happened, as Huda was telling us, before 48, after 48, during the Nakba, because only 10% of those that were living in the 60% of the land in the south are there. Most of them are IDPs, internally displaced people, and then they were reproduced as unrecognized. So it's just fascinating how this dismemberment of her family, of her home, of her land, and of her future are major points. Now, for us, as if we look at the history of colonial governments, we really reveal that the politics and the political logic entails the involvement of the settler states' invasion of the home and of the family, which is apparent in the child removal policy, if we look at the Canada or in the US or Australia. So the colonial settler states' welfare policy was concerned with the lives of the natives' family and informed by racializing notions that viewed these children as threats to be managed through redisciplining. Such policies were also avowed, enlightened, and well-intentional, promoting the project of dispossession. So what we hear today in the welfare policy, oh, we want to save those Bedouin children from what Huda was talking about, which is, for example, the health hazard that I will be speaking about, and saving them from sickness and from falling. The amount of falling and accidents in the Naqab are the highest according to the statistics. But the question is, what about the structure? What about the street? What about electricity? What about sewage? Now, there are so many issues, but home and the attack on the home carries a psychosocial meaning as a space where a person's subjectivity in relation to the world is developed. Critical scholars have sought to unravel the way in which social spaces such as home are substantially formed in response to the structure of racism and political oppression outside it, making home a political site of survival. Now think about Bedouin kids that are there and not even their home and home space is safe because the bulldozers are coming and demolishing, and because their own father or mother, as Huda have informed us, are demolishing it in their own hands. And think about the humiliation and the psychosocial effect. So the home for racialized communities is a place where relations are defined by mutual affirmation, where one can heal many of the wounds inflicted by racist domination. Now, understanding the meaning of home in its political context is crucial for comprehending the Naqab, yeah, as a home for the Bedouin and as a home for the Bedouin child. Home has many meanings, both tangible and symbolic, which differs semantically, culturally, spatially, and temporally according to the professional lens through which home is framed. Yeah, home is a space in which to live that meets not only basic physical needs, but also deep emotional and psychological ones. Home has been regarded as a mirror of the self, yeah, by Marcus, an intimate space for the self-integration, as Bachelard tells us, and a space that provides physiological needs such as comfort, security, and belonging, as Bell Hooks, Black feminist, has told us. According to Bell Hooks, the home place is where the child the child learns dignity, integrity of being, and faith, a self-affirming site where Black people could survive and strive to the subjects, not objects of racial oppression. Now, what we see in the Naqab, the attack on the home, the fact that the state is really not, it was not enough to displace and to take the issue of the land, to call it, and to use all sorts of laws, the emergency laws and so on, to steal the land, but rather the direct attack on the only space that the child can feel safe, yeah? So home is a space that represents not only the personal or individual story, but also the history, because what we see in the Naqab is exactly a reflection of the history, of the collective narrative and memory of the story of the homeland. So for the indigenous and Naqabi, the oppressed communities that experience uprooting, violence, and racism, home becomes a site of resistance and struggle where individuals can maintain their dignity and their power. So what we see in the different analysis on, for example, my own work with children, when I asked them to draw the home, it was really fascinating how home was the food, was the mother, was the walls. But all of a sudden, when you read it from the other side, from the colonizer side, what we read is differently. For example, in one of the latest cases where a demolition happened, a bulldozer came and demolished the house, and a child was injured because the child was behind a wall. The discussion and the title of the newspaper information was a child was hurt by a falling wall, like the wall fell alone on that child and killed him. It's not that there is a state and there is a structure that is attacking and affecting the children. And I think that it's very, very important to look at the meaning of home and the role of home and the fact that state terror is really reflected in the way we read the home. In addition to that, the management of childhood in the Naqab is fascinating. There is a vexed, really, and complex historical context for Zionist concern with the Naqab. And if you only look at the books by whether Eyal Weizman or Yiftach El or Mansour Nasasra, they tell you how there are different narratives. The Israeli narratives, where even if Palestinians are proving that the land belongs to Palestinians, to the indigenous Naqabi, they come and say, no, the Ottoman files are lying. The British files are lying. No, it's only the Israeli Zionist claim. They are the right one. So when we look at the different historical context and material, we see that even during Ben Gurion, and I'm here quoting from Yachel and Kark, they say that the Negev, I quote, was held in great importance to the Zionist project. Ben Gurion considered Jewish possession of the Naqab vital for the state in the making. The security danger he attributed to the Bedouin was linked to their nomadic wandering and their ability to appear astride their mount and loom up suddenly as they come further. So this depiction, such as this, of the Palestinian Bedouin as uncivilized, pre-modern, nomadic, and other, racialization is really at work, have contributed to the construction of the Badawi as an inherent threat to the Israeli modern state and civilized way of life, as has been the case of other Palestinians who have managed to remain in Palestine. The newly established Israeli state wanted the Bedouin off their land, but did not know how best to uproot them. So that 10% that stayed, they wanted to get rid of them, but they didn't know how to do it. More often than not, the Bedouin, because of their location, role, and cultural traditions, were essentialized by racist discourse as part of the pre-modern past, which it was assumed made them particularly prone to violence and criminal activity. In addition, their embodied practices situated them closer to nature and therefore as part of the physical landscape that could and should be manipulated to meet the needs of the settler colony. These racialized construction of the Bedouin and the history of the surveillance of their land helped to explain the Israeli state's continued fixation on modernizing them or civilizing them through forced relocation, which is about erasure, Only 19 of the original 95 Bedouin tribes inhabiting the Naqab received recognition from the newly established state following the Nakba. And following the trauma and the devastation of the Nakba, Israel placed Palestinian communities under a system, as Huda was explaining to us, system of military rule. This 20-year-long military rule isolated communities. So here we're talking about dismemberment, from one another, restricted movement, and created a regime of permit and ID systems so as to institute complete surveillance and control. Of the 19 tribes that had received state recognition, 12 removed from their historic lands and relocated to an infertile and small area called the Siyaj, which means the fence that Falah talks about it, and the Yiftakhel. These policies interfered with the Bedouins' local economy, and it made them, it de-developed them, as we've seen in other places, and hindered access to their farmlands, to grazing fields, to jobs, to market, and even to education. If you look at the work of Ismail Abu Sa'ad shows clearly how the Israeli system was working hard to infiltrate and to prevent Bedouins, deprive them from education. I'll go to one important issue that also Huda have raised, which is the issue of health and demography. According to Israel's Minister of Health, Bedouin children have Israel's highest rates of hospitalization, highest rates of infant mortality, low birth weight, and slow growth, and anemia, iron deficiency, and also the most cases of infectious disease. Look at the work of Nihaya Dahoud, she writes about it. While examining the social ecology of maternal infant care in the Naqab, researchers found that Bedouin mothers identify social, political, economic, and cultural factors as determinant of poor infant health. As one of the study concluded by stating that the interventions to improve infant care in the Naqab, and I'm quoting, will have a limited effect without policies that tackle the social determinants of health mothers. I have pointed in her study, this is Nihaya Dahoud's studies, such as housing, living conditions, infrastructure, transportation, and healthcare services. Medical and psychosocial analysis of children in the Naqab reveal a combination of settler colonial thinking and purification regime that impact the superiority of the Israeli Jewish state and the inferiority of the Bedouin captive body, a combination that began even before a Bedouin child is born and during the moment of its birth. The prevalence of low birth weight among newborns, for example, is usually tied to accusation of negligent parents, or backwardness, or explained as being due to cultural barriers. Abu Ghanim's work, for example, on this issue is clear. The authors of studies making accusations such as this treat the health problem of Bedouin children and the disparities between the Bedouin, because usually those studies are kind of comparing Bedouin children versus Jewish children in the Naqab, claiming that they have accessibility to hospitals and to Kupot Kholim, to healthcare. So why do they have those problems? So that, and the way Lifshitz, for example, in her study, she calls it, it's problematic society. That is the concept, the way she deals with health issues among Bedouins. What I see that the settler colonial policies in the Bedouin villages enhance health risks, and enhance psychosocial issues. increases the vulnerability of infants to health problems, yeah, and hinder proper access to medical and educational services and welfare, as Berman tells us. So medical professionals have warned families about the danger of living in unrecognized villages. So there is another way of telling people, of moving people, of causing sickness, or what Jasbir Parr would call maiming in Gaza. Over here, maiming is coming through sickness, through diseases. And the issue that I'm putting on the table is that medical professionals that are not calling to stop the structural abuse are really cooperating with the system. So not only legal professionals that are using the Israeli laws and Israeli court, but also medical professionals that are helping the system. And because what we see is that the families are suffering from dangers living in the unrecognized condition because of the lack of infrastructure, including medical care, paved road, water, electricity, and sewage services, as my own study have showed, while turning a blind eye to the structural inequality and the gendered and sexualized nature of such accusations, that accusing the Bedouins of being primitive and so on. So I guess that if I would like to try to conclude here by saying that the link between medical experts and colonial oppression is clear, and between welfare and welfarism, claiming they want to save and they want to care and they want to support and so-called civilize, is clearly apparent in the case of the Naqab. What I see that Israel's state control of the Naqab has led not only to land dispossession accompanied by the refusal to recognize Bedouin communities, leaving them really deprived of resources, of electricity, of schools, as Huda was telling us, access to streets, and more. And I can attest from one of my studies with young girls who were working in the Naqab, who were used by Israeli employers as tomato pickers, and they used to come pick them up at around 3:30 a.m. before they went to school in order to pick tomato and bring them back, and then those young girls managed to go to school. So I think that, and the Abu Rube'a Quader and the Mer'i Sarwan and Ronnie Stryer really talks about, Dorit Stryer talks about those issues. So the circumstances preventing children from accessing education must, of course, be read in the context of decades of dispossession, and looking at what goes on, and requires us really to understand the connection and the incapacitation. This is why when I said I would like to talk about incapacitation, because it's incapacitating the colonized child, it's incapacitating parents and their ability to handle such structure of oppression. And I think that the Naqab is an amazing case that combines and can really shed the light on the way the policies in East Jerusalem and in occupied East Jerusalem is handled, but in a way also, it really brings history, it brings politics, it brings professional complicity into question. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Nadira. Thank you for this very enlightening presentation that reminds us that clinicians should have a wide look at what goes on the ground. The incapacitating of the settler colonial state, how it can be confronted by clinicians, maybe to recapacitate the people living there, the colonized, who are suffering from the policies of the colonizer, and their way to completely discipline the people there, and having them to carry the weight of living in such a difficult place as the unrecognized villages, and having to blame them for the situations that they live in, while totally disregarding the structural injustice that they live in the reality that they live in. And thank you, Nadira, for this. That was very, as I said, powerful and enlightening. And I would like to move to our third speaker, Shireen Abu Badr. Shireen will be sharing with us her experience as a member of a team of volunteers providing emotional and psychological support for families of youth who were arrested during the events of May 21. And she works at a high school. She works as a high school teacher at a Bedouin Arab school in the Naqab, and she has a master's in counseling psychology with a concentration on drama therapy from California Institute of Integral Studies. So Shireen, are you there? The floor is yours. If you can share your experience with us in minutes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Huda and Nadira and everybody, and for having me here with you today. So my name is Shireen. I've been working as a therapist within the Bedouin community the last few years. I'm also from the Bedouin community as well. And a little bit about the Bedouin community is we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges that the Bedouin community faces, but I think it's also very important for us to recognize the uniqueness of the Bedouin community. If you come down here and you sit with a Bedouin family, and you'll notice the hospitality and the welcoming, which really does show what our tradition is all about. It's a very collective community. It's all about being together for the good and the bad. I mean, it has its upsides and its downsides with that. As both Huda and Nadira shared about the different challenges that the community faces, in addition to the infrastructure, the water, the electricity that was talked about, there's also the topic about identity, which is also talked a little bit about who are we. A lot of people within the Bedouin community face this struggle of how do I identify myself? What is my identity? As a high school teacher, I will have students asking me, who am I? And it's something that a lot of people grow up questioning themselves. There's also the challenges, which is also talked about being a marginalized community, whether it's because of the infrastructure, the streets, even the topic about waste, about garbage within different locations. Some locations don't even have a way to get rid of their garbage and have to pile all the garbage outside and then burn their own garbage, which is also another thing that a lot of Bedouin people have to face and live and experience on a daily basis. The topic of education and getting a good education. And is education considered a priority? Because if it takes so much energy to, as Huda talked about, just to reach a school, a lot of people will be like, okay, I'm not going to let my children go through that. Maybe it's just better that they go and work. And we can see that, again, as a teacher, I can see that in high school, we have the number of male students just gets less and less, because a lot of male students will decide, I don't want an education. I would prefer to go and help my family economically and go and work, and instead of going to school. Now, all of these different challenges obviously have emotional and psychological impacts. So I was just going through all the different challenges that we go through, and then just with each of them, the different impact that it has whether it's about the school, whether it's about the waste, whether it's about not having electricity during COVID and they couldn't go to school. Each of these different things on its own has its own impact. And just imagine putting each of them and another and another and another and another. And it's kind of saying, okay, maybe we have PTSD, but then there's a problem with it because PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. That means it's after an effect. Whereas the living conditions that the Bedouin community faces is not post anything, it's a daily struggle. So our lives in itself can be a traumatic experience that does not end. We are born into it and have to continue dealing with it on a daily basis, which leads obviously to a lot of the things that we see in our community, whether it's the topic about violence, whether it's about, I saw a question in the chat before about the treatment with women or different things. All the different things and challenges that we face obviously leads to the impact, the long-term impact. And it's important to recognize that as it becomes a daily topic, it's very much, these conditions that we live through are very much normalized, which I think is something that we ourselves, we get normalized by the weather conditions. Let's say, for example, where different places don't have electricity, and we have to deal with the harsh weather conditions when it's very hot and there's no air conditioner, or the opposite when it's very cold, or different, the place where I teach in the high school, there's no electricity and they use solar systems. Now, if there is no, in the winter, the sun, it gets dark maybe around 4 p.m. A lot of time, the electricity will go off midday, and then the rest of the day they don't have electricity, so they can't work and they can't study and they can't even just watch TV or do something simple. Giving all of these different examples, it's really just to emphasize the harsh conditions that are normalized, and that way it also normalizes the mental health impact. Because I think a lot of what we Bedouins go through and our reactions, or the way we think, the way that we're barbaric, that we can be seen within the media, or we're violent, or we're ignorant, that is the stereotypes that we get perceived as. But it doesn't get understood that it's as a consequence of everything that we have to endure. So I want to give this a little bit as a background as I talk specifically about the work that we did last May and this year, when there was political tension after what happened in Sheikh Jarrah and the war with Israel and Gaza, and there were a lot of protests and a lot of people were getting arrested, especially teens and young children. And a lot of people wanted, including me and other mental health workers, wanted to use our work or ourselves and help different people who were getting hurt by the arrest. We decided to give emotional support to families that were arrested, or children or teens or even adults that were arrested, and to support the families. So I had talked with Asrar, who started this initiative in the north and in Jerusalem, and we decided to also do it here, where when we would find out from either it was from social media or different lawyers or different people that somebody was arrested, we would go and to the family, we would contact the family, and we would visit the family, hear their story, validate their experience, and see what they were doing and let them know that they were not going through this by themselves. And in addition to that, also be able to give them initial psychoeducation and mental health tools and support. Well, the idea was mainly about having the community as a community supporting. As I said, it's a very collectivistic community. So the idea that the collective ourselves, we would also heal together as we were going through this very tiring, very stressful, very angering period of time. So that the idea of us healing together and not just becoming as a professional group or officials or something, but just as regular people within the community who are worried of their well-being, of their how they were doing, and also being aware that because we are professionals, we are able to compartmentalize and come, and we were angry with them, but at the same time, we could also balance ourselves and be able to see them. We were able to see how they were doing. If there were anything that we could notice that they needed additional mental health services, that we could later on refer them to other professionals so that they would be able to receive the support that they deserve, and to be able to lead them to the correct areas. A lot of the families that were going through these experiences were going through obviously a lot. I mean, they had to go through worrying about the whereabouts of their child, the well-being. The teenagers would be arrested. In last January, we had even a child by the age of 12 years old who was arrested in the middle of the night by the police. And again, going back to the idea of the collective. So when we talk about that a child is, or a person is arrested, we can't, within the Bedouin community, only focus on the individual or the person who was arrested, but we have to look at the bigger picture. We have to zoom out and we have to focus on the parents, the siblings, the extended family, the town, and the area, because every single person is impacted by it and not just the person. So when we would go to the family, we would really look at the different people and see how the different people were reacting to the situation. I will give one example of a teenage boy who was arrested last May. It's important to, I'll just say that it's important to obviously notice that we volunteers, we would go just as fellow Bedouin cousins going to support, and not going as any officials or going to judge or going to ask questions, but mainly just to go and be present with them and to support them. So when we had a teenage boy, when we went to his house, he shared a story where he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he was arrested by the officers, and then he was charged with different charges that he was being violent. And when we went to the boy, this was after he was jailed for like a month, and he did not have a lot of contact with his mother, and he missed his school, he missed his friends. And when he left when they released him on house arrest. And it's really important to recognize when they released him, they did not allow him to go back to his home in his village. They said that he had to go to, if he wanted house arrest, he had to be in a different city. Obviously the family would have to rent another house, so that they would put the family under the reality where they had to suddenly pay to rent an apartment when they didn't have the money to do that. So there's an additional charge. So the police or the court, they gave them the choice. He could go on house arrest in a different place, but he would also have to have an adult with him. So his mother had to quit her job to stay with him. and they had to pay for rent suddenly, or he could go to, or he could stay in jail, or they would present it as though he had choices, where in reality, it's not really a choice. So even though it was extremely difficult for the parents and they had to get loans from families and other people, they rented an apartment in a different city. And as I said, the mother had to quit her job, stay with him. And this had to disturb the whole dynamics of the family, because suddenly the mother wasn't in the picture, the other siblings were home and they couldn't be together. So there was now the whole impact of a missing mother, a brother who's suddenly away and terrified. There was a sister who was supposed to get married and suddenly that all went away. A father who within the Bedouin community has to be the strong man who has to take care of his family, and suddenly the whole house is out of control and nothing is in control and he doesn't know what to do. So this is just a tiny glimpse of what happens just by an arrest. And I think my facial expression is telling you how I'm feeling about this. But it's extremely, extremely, extremely challenging for every single person within the family and within the neighbors, because everybody does want to support, and at the same time, they don't know how to support, which I think is why it's our work, because we are within the community. So we have the anger and the frustration alongside them, but at the same time, we're a bit outside of it. So we're also more collected and we can go and be more present and be more collected. I know my time is ending. He did have a little bit more to say, but I think I was able to show a little bit about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Shireen. And you are doing a wonderful initiative, being there with the people, showing social support in this very harsh reality. Just being there with them, we know that social support is an important way to lead and to heal, if possible, psychological crises. And it's interesting that you were talking about how there are layers and layers of psychological impact, and how do you deal with post-traumatic stress when there is no post. The whole life is one ongoing trauma, one after the other. And precisely because of that, initiatives like the one that you are involved in are very important. So thank you very much for being part of it, and thank you very much for sharing with us. I would like at this point to thank all the three speakers. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. And I would like to open the door now for questions. I saw that there's quite a number of questions being written on the chat. I could read some of the questions on the chat, and I invite you. I would like to invite those who wrote on the chat if they would like to present their questions, and I would like to invite anybody else who would like to ask a question. One of the things, does anybody like to ask any question, or should I read the questions that I collected? Okay, I think I will introduce a couple of questions to each speaker, and then we'll see if other people would like to ask more questions. There were two questions for Huda. I have the questions. I just I need to see who asked the question. I think that was Paula, who asked where displaced people usually go to find a shelter. And there was another question, is it true that the state plots over the farmers' crops that they would use to feed their flocks? I can't find the question, so I don't know who asked it. Okay, so we have these two, and there's also, yes, I can see it now. It's a question by Philip Nixon. And Linda had a question also. Could Huda please comment on the situation now in Wadi Na'am? Is there still a serious situation concerning pollution from the nearby industrial site, which causes things like cancer, miscarriages, stillbirth, asthma, etc.? Brooke says, I've been stuck when attempting to bring people's attention to the situation of the Bedouin by the instrumentalization of the feminist discourse, putting all the accent on high incidence of honor killing, domestic violence, oppression of women, etc. Has Nadira come across to this? So this is a question for Nadira. Martin also had a question. Has any mainstream Israeli professional organization involved in mental health, public health, medical health, social work ever protested these policies being imposed on their fellow citizens? Okay, should we take a round of answers until I collect the other questions? Huda, would you like to start?
Yes, sure. I would like to start with a question about Wadi Na'am. I was there a few days ago, and the chemical plants still there, still exist, the electricity company still exists, but the chemical plants no longer affect or cause disease, because the Ministry of Environment in Israel, they had a plans to prevent the impact because of Israel international commitments on the impact of plants on public health. So there is the companies or the plants still exist, but there is no impact, no health impact on people. But there is still there is a problem with the electricity company. Still problem, people are suffering from it. Hopefully we will find solution with it. I don't know what will be the solution, but the state today is suggesting them to move from Wadi Na'am to Shugeb Salam. They don't agree. So I don't know what the solution will be, and then I believe it will be there is a solution that will come through in the few years, next few years. There was a question about the legal justification of the home demolitions of or the unrecognition of the villages. So
yes, I actually just saw the question. So if you give me a minute, I would like to read it, please, Huda. What is the legal justification of not recognizing these villages and forcing displacement towards the township, military zone, wish to establish settlements. So what's the legal justification for that?
It's illegal. It's illegal villages, which means that the state didn't plan them, and the buildings there is illegal. You don't have any permit to build buildings there, and it's a state land. So if the state don't plan villages, so and there is no one can build homes, or no one can build community, or no one can use the land. And again, the Zionist concept is that they are trying all the time to bring many Arabs as possible on a little territory as possible. So they trying to bring more people on very small piece of land on Arab-Palestinian issues. I think there was a question about plowing the lands, destroying the crops. So yes, the answer is yes. Every year during the spring, there is the state plows the land, destroy the crops, and of course it affects them financially, makes them poorer. It's a very hard days in the spring. Every year it's a very hard situation. When I go to work and I see the bulldozers and the tractors on the way to those places, it's very hard to see this. So yeah, it still exists. And the last question was what people do when the state destroyed their homes. So they stay in homes of close family. The solution that the state suggests is to move to the recognized townships, but people don't agree because there is land ownership sensitivity in those villages. So if in the recognized villages, I mean the recognized townships, when someone from outside the original community comes as a new person in a people who in a community that knows everybody, and there is clearance that this family is living in this area and that family is living in those area. And when someone comes from outside the community or the big tribe or something, so it's caused a lot of violence. So people from the unrecognized villages don't want to move to the recognized villages. Other reason is actually that there is no work, no places for work. So people say, okay, I live in unrecognized village in my land and I will stay in my land, because if I move to recognized village or to township, my situation will not be better. I will have problems with my neighbors. I will maybe someone will kill me. I don't know. So people don't want to move from unrecognized to recognized village. I think this is all the questions I had.
Thank you, Huda. Nadira.
Yeah.
Are you with us, Nadira?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I am here. And Yeah, I think that the question came from Brooks regarding the situation, regarding the issue of raising a topic of honor crimes. And I think that we all know that the murder of women and girl under the pretense of honor has always emerged as one of the most sensationalized issue in the global media and especially in colonial perceptions. So when it comes to the niqab, it's also a way of culturalizing. It's also a way of orientalizing and otherizing. And I think that that when we ask questions, and I'm a criminologist, so when we ask questions of related to the social circumstances, psychological circumstances, economic circumstances in which murders takes place, we really need to position it in the context, the historical context, in the various systems, in the manners in which they are discursively constructed and represented. And I think that this looking at the dialectic interrelationship between the formal of the state, the informal legal sanctions, the way the context of colonization, and the fact that the best way is to look and to reproduce the issue of honor crime to silence or the so-called honor crime to further the politics of exclusion, and it plays to the hands of the colonial of the colonialists. So then they come up with those analysis of, okay, let's talk about saving them. But what I'm saying here is that if you want to raise, and I'm a person who looked at femicide and colonialism and studied the different cases of women killing, I think that it's very, very important to look at what kind of rights are they, what kind of safety, what kind of housing, freedom of movement, political rights and economic development, education and health. So this, so for example, in one of the cases that I have dealt with, it was a Bedouin woman that was, I think Shireen was talking about the issue of the ID. So she's married to somebody in the niqab, but she's without an ID, and because the niqabi, the Sabawiya, are related to people in Hebron and in Gaza, and because we are not, you can't uproot the connections between people, and this woman have tried to complain against her husband 7 times. Each time she reached a police station, they told her that she's out of place, until one day she heard that her 2 daughters were killed. So I think that the system, all of it, the culture, the killing, is all embedded in a context, and without contextualizing and understanding the suffocation, precarity, and debilitation is part of the game, is part of the colonial game. We could never understand violence, and we could never understand the gendered aspect of violence, and we could never, so those that are complicit and those that are cooperating are the police that are silencing, is the structure that is failing women, is the fact that there are no response and answer to violence against women, and to the prevention of violence against the children, even the unborn in the niqab. So I guess land and life are intertwined, and we need to look at violence and the gender aspect, the gender nature of violence as such.
Yeah, and there's also the colonial concept. I think it was a couple of months ago, not too long ago, when an Israeli official, I think it was a minister for internal security, they call it, as he was commenting on violence and crime among the Palestinian community inside Israel. He said they come from a violent culture. The Arab culture is a violent culture. This is an Israeli official. This is how they try to show the reason for violence, and to hide the structural injustice and the structural
It's not to say that there is not a problem. There is a problem, and we are tomorrow, for example, we have a major conference in the Naqab exactly on the issue of violence inside the Palestinian community. But we need really to remember that naming, for example, so the moment somebody is calling it honor crimes, or in Israel, they call it crimes on romantic basis, or in the US, crimes of passion. There's no honor, no passion, and no romance when a man kills a woman or when a brother kills his sister and so on. And I think that we in the Palestinian society, we've called it femicide, qatl al-nisa, and refusing to call it honor crimes, because the moment you call it honor, it's somebody's honor, and it's probably the masculine patriarchal honor, and there is a reproduction of that honor by using the concept. So we are, as feminist organization in entire Palestine, dealing with it, handling it. But the problem is that the structural limitations, the fact that the law is not helping, the fact that the police is not helping, in looking at Naqab, every time a woman went to the police, the answer was, it's up to you if you want to complain, if you want this, and I have an article called it's up to her. So if you want to, you can complain. No, we need to create a system. The fact that the system is reproducing marginalization, otherization, it's really allowing and mobilizing violence against women.
Nadira, do you want to say a word or two about the question that was about any Israeli clinicians or social workers or mental health workers protesting for these policies, against these policies?
Yes, I think that there is, but not enough. If you will ask me personally, I think that when you see them feminist except for Palestine, you see them therapeutic except for Palestinians, you see them. So yes, there is and in the Naqab there is more than in other places, because some of the Israeli scholars that are working really hard in moving things, and for example, Zukhrot have done an amazing job in looking at Al-Araqib and in finding documentations, checking what is there in Istanbul and other places. The fact that we have amazing Palestinian scholars in the Naqab, Ismail Abu Saad, his work on education, the first in kind that looked at settler colonialism as affecting education, and was major. And so this work is done at Ben Gurion University, and there are amazing young Palestinian scholars, Mansour Nasasra with his latest work, that are working with Oren Yeftach El, Ahmed Amara is working with Oren Yeftach El. So there are, ICAD is covering various issues in the Naqab. So yes, there are lots of initiatives. The question is whether it's managing, because the Braver Pass, with all the trials of many Israeli organizations, the discrimination and racism and the dispossession of land, there's a plan, and the plan is erasure, and the plan is dispossession of land. And we are talking about really a very, very large amount of land. Yeah, there was another question regarding the unrecognized villages. I think that, I don't know, it was about the legal aspect that we have missed, but we need to remember that the legal aspect should really be politicized, because because during the 1800, 1900, the Ottoman Empire started asking Bedouins to register and to use the taboo. Some of them did, some others did not. 4.3% of the population, according to the work of Mansour Ahmed Amara, have registered. And we're talking about both Jews and Arabs. So those that did not register are the ones that ended up in a very, very harsh conditions. And the people of the unrecognized villages are those that refused to be in the Asiyaj area, and they wanted to stay in their land. So they're unrecognized by Israel, but they are recognized by everyone else according to customary law.
So their land
aspect is important.
Yes, thank you, Nadira. I think I saw Martin raising his hand. Martin?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the reason I asked the question was to underline Nadira's point about the collaboration of professionals in this process of erasure and colonization, because our own professional associations maintain relationships with their Israeli counterparts on the basis that these are non-political or apolitical organizations and so forth. So it's really to underline the sort of collaboration and the the absence of the mainstream engagement with Zionism and its projects and so forth by the associations that we have relationships with.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. I would like to say that from my experience, you can, as Nadira said, there are people working on this, and they're not enough. But I think from my experience, it is very notable how people in Israel, even people working in public health or mental health, can show much more sympathy to other people suffering and not to the Palestinian suffering. It's as if they recognize the Palestinian suffering, it's kind of recognizing their own part in inflicting this suffering, and we can analyze this. But there is, if you open Israeli media, you would see enormous sympathy for what's happening in Ukraine, for example. But you cannot see one bit of for what's happening in the Naqab, in Jerusalem, in Gaza. So this is, I personally think that politics is involved everywhere. So everything is politicized, and as Nadira was saying, the legal is politicized, everything is politicized. This is the situation, actually.